Am I good? I don't know if I can use this thing. I don't have a thingy to put it on. Oh well, I've been blessed with a big mouth and fantastic taste in shoes, so you probably can hear me. My first experience working with people diagnosed with dementia was in a nursing home. They had a special needs unit, and you had to press a code to go in and out of the unit. There was also in the interior wall of the unit, the door was painted as shelves so that the residents would be deterred from exit seeking. For exercise, usually they were tossed a big bright red ball, and there was an outside area. This was a paved walking path. It had about 2 feet of grass on either side of it, and it was surrounded by a chain link fence with wire on the top. You got on the path at one end of the unit, and at the other end of the unit, you came back in. So by virtue, the residents walked in a circle. For activities, the residents were often handed plastic baby dolls or a toy version of a real item, like a tool or a baking set. Reality orientation was the common care practice of the day. So this was, for any of you who don't remember reality orientation, it was an effort to orientate residents to the reality of their lives. So if Mrs. Jacobson was wandering around looking for her husband, she would be told, well, your husband is dead, and that's why you live here with us. This was information she couldn't process. This was new information every time she heard it, and this would go on all day. That was 20 years ago. I'd like to say things have changed, but we still lock people in units even though they have no ability cognitively to press a code to go in and out. They couldn't find an exit if they had to. We still treat dementia as a mental illness, and we still house a lot of individuals with dementia with people who do have mental illness, and the treatment is much the same, with antipsychotics, anti-anxiety, and sedating drugs. We still train our caregivers to be task-orientated. The grooming, the feeding, the exercise, the activities, these are all tasks. Where's the person in that? And we still spoon feed people when they don't want to eat anymore. The Riceberg scale for dementia and Alzheimer's has 7 stages. Stages 1 through 4 are characterized by mild cognitive impairment. Usually people have just been diagnosed, they're still in the home, they have a familiarity, and so they're able to compensate for any cognitive deficits that they do have. Stages 5 through 7 are your later stages. It's important to remember that you just don't wake up one day with dementia. Usually there's a primary diagnosis: stroke, diabetes, COPD, CHF, Parkinson's disease. Usually the primary diagnosis affects the progression of the dementia and the cognitive impairment that follows, as well as the ability to physically and clinically manage individuals. The primary diagnosis is the driver. The dementia definitely takes a second seat, but it will progress based on whatever the individual is dealing with first and foremost. Stages 5 through 7, we often see physical needs increase, we see behaviors, we see there's a realization for many individuals that they're failing, that they're not able to do everything that they used to be able to do. The cues that worked in stages 1 through 4, like writing notes, now brush your teeth, now it's time to eat. These kind of cues that worked in stages 1 through 4 no longer work. Physical things like putting on your shoes, brushing your teeth, these take a lot of steps. So maybe the individual gets step 1 and 2 right, but 3 and 4, that's a little more difficult. So I've got a toothbrush, I've loaded it with toothpaste, now what do? Oh, I brush my hair. You see a lot of mixing up because the more steps it takes, the more difficult it is. Caregivers, by the time someone's a stage 5, are spent. they're done. The time for planning and preparing is stages 1 through 4, because by the time a person is stage 5, they are a full-time job. Dressing, eating, feeding, food choices, and if they have another disease, clinical management is added to the equation. Physical decline. We start to see falls, we start to see incontinence, other behaviors, other issues that take a lot of time and energy. Then people start to resign themselves to the fact that maybe they should start looking for assisted living. If your individual has just been diagnosed and in the early stages, you inquire into assisted living. Usually people try to manage their loved one at home for much longer because they get the sticker price of assisted living. On average, you're going to look at between $5,000 and $8,000 a month. A month. I think Phyllis said $72,000 a year. That is for a stage 5 individual that needs help with some kind of dressing and grooming, incontinent management, that sort of thing. The reality is assisted living or nursing homes are in the business of giving care. This business is heavily regulated. Every individual that is moved in has to have a plan, a service plan. And this plan is for everything in the individual's lives, from dressing and grooming to toileting to eating. Everything is it's like a recipe. Everything is put down in this plan. And so if an individual falls, there has to be a plan to correct the fall. Individual has incontinence, there has to be a plan to support the incontinence. The average stay is 18 to 24 months in an assisted living, and that's based on the primary diagnosis and the cognitive level an individual is at when they are admitted. I'm speaking primarily in regard to dementia. Alzheimer's disease has it looks very different from beginning to end in a clinical setting. So every facility has to have a plan. And most facilities have a plan for if somebody comes in with a walker and they start having falls, then they go to a wheelchair, they go to the next step. The most common plan that you see in communities or facilities is a weight plan. This is once or twice a month. You have all the residents rounded up and their weight. If they have a 5 to 10 pound weight loss, there has to be a plan to either stop this weight loss or sustain the weight that they're at. So then, in the later stages, it becomes a reality that using a fork, a knife, and a spoon is quite difficult. So we go to a bowl with a lip on it and a spoon. Residents can feed themselves for a while. If that doesn't work, the next step is finger foods. And oftentimes, sippy cups or cups that somebody can hold with 2 hands filled with nutritional or protein shakes, that goes along with the finger foods. After finger foods, you become a feeder. You cannot go into any nursing home or any assisted living in this general area of Whatcom County and find and ask to see feeders, because every facility has them if they serve memory care. And when I talk to you about a feeder, I mean an individual who has a bib placed on them or a chest protector. It depends on how aware the facility is trying to be about dignity. So some call them bibs, but some say chest protectors. Then a resident is wheeled in, and they're fed usually a pureed diet to help manage and sustain their weight. This is the reality. When I first met Mamie, she walked into the dementia unit, and she was a former New Yorker, and she owned the place. She had a quick wit and a fiery tongue, and she had a snow white coiffed that was gorgeous, and these blue eyes. And she had a response for every question that was answered. Whether it was appropriate or not, she would let you know. Mamie also suffered from macular degeneration, so she was going blind. So it was hard to tell what her cognitive level was, because a lot of people with dementia take visual cues. So she couldn't take visual cues, so she was kind of fumbling her way through. So for a while, Mamie could manage her walker and make it to meals with an escort and back to her room. And for about 6 months, this worked. And she was doing very, very well and adjusting pretty nicely to being admitted into assisted living. After about 7 months, she started to fall. She could no longer manage the walker, and so she fell, and she fell. So a plan had to be devised. So Mamie had to be in a wheelchair. And when she was in the wheelchair, she could not remember to not stand up. So they attached a chair alarm to her. So Mamie got up, she was blind, she was in a wheelchair, the alarm went off. It screamed. Mamie screamed. So the chair alarm doubled as a bed alarm. So Mamie was put to bed, alarm was removed from the chair, clipped on her, and if the caregiver didn't give her enough slack, every time she rolled, the alarm went off. So now her world's becoming smaller. She's blind. She's at the beck and call of caregivers. And an alarm goes off every time she moves. So now care is becoming an issue. She can't toilet herself, obviously. She can't shower herself. So she has to be showered, she has to be toileted, and it's upsetting. All of a sudden, you're sitting in your chair, somebody comes in on a 2-hour schedule to toilet you, they transfer you from your wheelchair to the toilet, and you're in the dark, and you're cognitively impaired. And oftentimes, again, we train caregivers to be task-orientated. So there's no headway, they're in there to do a job and to get it done. So Mamie would scream, Mamie would bite, Mamie would hit, Mamie would curse. Mamie would get angry. She was afraid. She was in the dark. And an alarm kept going off every time she moved. For a while there, she would mimic the caregivers because every time she stood up, somebody would say, "Sit down, Mamie." So finally, she would say, "Sit down, Mamie, sit down, Mamie, sit down, Mamie," for hours every day. It's humorous now, but that was her reality. After Mamie started to demonstrate behaviors that were inappropriate, the hitting, the biting, the cursing, she was medicated. And in Washington State, if you ask for a medication on an as-needed basis, for 14 days, if you use it as it is needed, all you have to do is petition the doctor and you can get it routine. So now, Mamie, who came in with eye drops for her macular degeneration, was now on an antipsychotic and an anti-anxiety pill because she screamed and she fought. It took its toll. At 24 months, Mamie was broken. She was in the dark and she couldn't move to anything without hearing an alarm go off. But music was her refuge. She could listen to a song and she would be transported from her blind prison to another world. Sorry. Every day, I would stop by her room before I left at night. And I would start with the song and she would always finish it. With someone like you, a friend good and true. And she would always finish the next line. I would ask her about her family and her 5 brothers, and she would tell me about her rotten little brother, Alvy, who always stole snowballs and would hit her with them, and their life in New York. But by 26 months, she was broken. And the once spectacular white coiffed hair was now gone. She would sit in a corner in her wheelchair and bob up and down till she wore bald spots on the side of each of her head. The need for an understanding of dementia and Alzheimer's and the transparency into care setting is so important. There's 5.3 million people who are going to die of this disease, and they need to be aware of the choices and the opportunities that they have to control the end. It took her 26 months and 14 hours to pass away. She was in the dark, and she was alone. Thank you.